Well, it has certainly been 3 intense days of neurons firing and wiring. On some level, it has been dizzying. But there has been plenty of positive clarity of thought and lots of malleability. As stated in one of the literature reviews, once a mind has been stretched by a new experience, it can never go back to its old dimensions. I hope you're all feeling stretched. As was the case in Lisbon, here too, student agency has been a driving concept. This includes students in all their diversity, including from both hemispheres and diverse socioeconomic groups, both genders and all ages. It's worth recalling that the youngest person to create a profit-generating mobile phone app was 7-year-old Zora Ball. Next to agency, co-agency has risen as a further key concept. None of us operates in a vacuum. Peers, parents, teachers, and communities all interact with one another and influence one another, be that consciously or unconsciously. Much has been done to continue to further define the scope of meaning of the terms we've been using. Co-agency for Education 2030 is not about indoctrination, manipulation, or placation, but rather about partnership. Students are intended to be at the center of that partnership. Ideally, students, parents, teachers, peers, communities, all interact constructively, both influencing and being influenced by one another. Trust is an important emollient, facilitating communication. Trust is easily lost when we do not walk the talk, when we do not encourage true agency or co-agency. It is much harder to rebuild. The path that young people will follow toward a world of individual and societal well-being will not resemble a straight and narrow highway. They will face many challenges along the way, have to deal with many curves in the road. They have a right to receive guidance by way of direction. They can benefit from having, metaphorically speaking, a compass to guide them and receiving support in using it. But above all, they need to feel the rock-solid support of adults from birth right through to young adulthood. That means receiving from adults rock-solid trust, guidance, respect, care, empathy, authenticity, non-judgment, safety, and validation. Knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values continue to be the 4 interacting foundational elements of the 2030 framework. Values are particularly powerful as they can guide our use of knowledge and skills. They are reflected through our attitudes and provide the energy to apply knowledge and skills. These terms have now been defined in greater depth. The attitude and values we have explored have been personal, local, societal, and global. Knowledge includes disciplinary, interdisciplinary, epistemic, and procedural. We have explored cognitive and metacognitive, social and emotional, and practical and physical skills. All 4, knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values, have competencies associated with them. Competencies are meant to be used. They need to lead to action. Being responsible is an indicator of maturity, as is navigating and working to reconcile tensions and dilemmas in order to take thoughtful action so as to create new value in order to make this a better world. From a curriculum perspective, this means placing the students at the center of the learning process and leaving space and creating opportunities for authentic learning experiences. These experiences are in the ideal co-created with students with the active participation of teachers, peers, parents, and communities. It means undertaking an ongoing cycle of authentic action, reflection, and anticipation in order to build the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values needed for adulthood. This means that learning needs to connect and interact with the world beyond the classroom walls in order to help young people to practice the co-construction of a world focused on individual and societal well-being. But what is well-being? We have defined it as including health, work-life balance, education and skills, social connections, safety and security, civic engagement, environmental quality, life satisfaction, income and wealth, jobs and earnings, housing. These elements rest on a solid foundation of natural, human, economic, and social capital. But the real world throws many challenges our way. These include environmental degradation, conflict, migration, inequality, pandemics, the changing labor market, and changing families, to name but a few. We need to be careful not to overfocus our attention on the negative. This will rob us of the energy needed to change the world. Instead, we need to focus on the positive, the potential environmental renaissance, technology's promise, and our own resilience. A growth mindset is essential to see and grasp the opportunities and reduce the negative impact of known and unknown disruptions. Yes, to be aware of the threats facing us, but to focus on the solutions. AI was raised as an example of both a potential threat and as a factor that holds great promise. So, agency requires self-regulation. Taking responsibility requires self-regulation. We need to recognize and manage our emotions and feelings, be that fear, laziness, shyness, or sadness, among many others. We carry these with us, but can manage them and use them as we operate in a VUCA world of fake news, inequality, cyber attacks, conflicts, environmental degradation, pandemics. We need to remain functional in this environment and stay focused on reconciling tensions and dilemmas and taking thoughtful action with others, reflecting and anticipating. This week, we have often discussed that cognition and affect are intertwined. As cited in one of the literature reviews, the aspects of cognition that are recruited most heavily in education, including learning, attention, memory, decision-making, motivation, social functioning, are both profoundly affected by emotion and in fact subsumed within the processes of emotion. If students are taught one social emotional skill, their performance on high-stakes tests increases by 11%. Perhaps more importantly, they are likely to experience increased well-being now and later in life. Knowledge, values, and attitudes offer a solid foundation. However, as Andreas has pointed out, just having knowledge is insufficient to lead to change if we do not have communication skills, collaboration skills, critical thinking skills, and creativity skills. 4, if we are going to take on and deal with the unprecedented challenges facing us as a human race, as members of the ecosystem that is the Earth, we will need to innovate, and to do this at a whole new level. Innovation requires empathy. The aim is not to innovate for oneself, but for the benefit of others. That requires perspective taking, seeing other people's needs and points of view, That requires openness to others and new ways of thinking. It calls for cooperation. So in our current context, good is not good enough when better is required. Yet as we demand more of ourselves and others, we need to make sure that we do not just create more opportunities for the most privileged in society. We need to also concentrate on raising the floor for everyone. Ultimately, it is about having our good become better and our better become the best. But that applies to everyone, with a particular responsibility for those that can to help raise the floor for everyone. And all of this so we can systematically move toward the society we must become, one that is focused on ensuring individual and societal well-being. Now, in order to do that, a bottom line has been identified. People plus profit plus planet. All three are in the short and the long term dependent on one another. None of these should live at the expense of the other, at the expense of the future of everyone. At the Lisbon meeting, as here in Paris, there was a great deal of discussion about the importance of working with stakeholders. And more stakeholders keep arising in our conversation. I think it's possible for us to view nature as a stakeholder that we must listen to more attentively. The term stakeholder can be defined as any group or individual that can be affected by or can influence the organization. In this case, the Education 2030 community. These are some of the stakeholders whom we discussed in Lisbon. We stress that these are never monolithic groups and that the diversity within these groups has to be recognized and reflected in stakeholder engagement. This time we have also spoken of nature as a stakeholder, media as a stakeholder, government officials, national, regional, and local as stakeholders, and Aboriginal peoples as stakeholders. It's always useful, as we have this time, to ask who is missing. For missing stakeholders may well rock the boat, so to speak, as we may not be considering their needs or potential impact on our plans. I stress that stakeholder dialogue is most likely to be successful if we root this in agreed upon knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values. This sentiment about the importance of stakeholder inclusion is well summarized by Ontario's model, nothing about us without us. Andreas recounted that over the years he has met many decision makers in education who have often said that if they had one regret, it is that they were always running to get things done, and that they wished that they had taken more time to stop, consult, and think, and that they had been more courageous in instituting needed change. From a management perspective, another concern raised this week is the considerable time lag that exists between recognition of a need, the making of decisions to address that need, implementation of actions to address the need, and the achievement of a positive impact. That cycle needs to be speeded up. We need to be more courageous in taking action. Getting traction, or in other words, support for our non-prescriptive yet aspirational Education 2030 curriculum framework, and reducing the potential time lag in its implementation involves building understanding of and commitment to the framework. In part, this will involve knowledge management. We need to capture knowledge from our work, which I believe we are doing, but package that in diverse formats that suit and meet the needs of each stakeholder group. This information does not just need to be disseminated to stakeholder groups, but discussed with them as well. On a pragmatic level, if decision makers are going to support the implementation of the Education 2030 framework, we will all need to work to demonstrate results. Proof will be required for decision makers to have the confidence to take needed steps. It's all one ecosystem. Other competing priorities will win out if we cannot demonstrate the results. The literature reviews provide some evidence, but more will be required. Another key aspect of that one ecosystem has been the discussion we've had around assessment, both in Lisbon and here in Paris. It continues to be front and center in our conversations. It was reiterated that assessment drives learning and that we need to mitigate the potential negative backwash effects of assessment. If A represents a person's entire knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values, a person's collective capacities, and B represents the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that allow a person to do well on tests, then in high-stakes situations, A is transformed so it begins to look like B. Students taking part in this meeting in Paris have repeatedly said they are concerned about the negative effects of assessment. I spent quite some time speaking to Luana from Brazil and Jonathan from the United States yesterday, who said, "We do not want to be shaped like this by the education system." They said loudly and clearly that we want more from the education system. They want an education system that sees and encourages the development of the whole person. I echo what was said so often over these 3 days. We need to find ways to align assessment systems with the Education 2030 framework. Literacy underpins student achievement. One language is often not enough. Many students are educated through their second or third language. Young people need languages to cross the intercultural divide. They need biliteracy and triliteracy. But many other forms of literacy were also discussed here as being central to building the competencies needed in today's and tomorrow's world. These include data literacy, computational, mathematical, emotional, digital, information, scientific, media, musical, assessment, and statistical literacy. The only way to achieve high degrees of all these forms of literacy is to integrate their development into existing curricula and making space for their development without overloading students. Education 2030, with its knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values, also seems to be a suitable model for us in this room as we work to develop and support the implementation of the framework. We need to work with stakeholders, students, peers, parents, communities, to reconcile tensions and dilemmas, to take responsibility and create new value. We need to take action, reflect, and anticipate as we operate in an iterative cycle to support the development and implementation of the aspirational yet non-prescriptive Education 2030 framework, which is focused on individual and societal well-being. And as we move forward, we need to walk the talk and to avoid a divide between what we say we do and what we actually do. In Lisbon, there was talk of including more stakeholders. There are now over 180 participants taking part in this meeting. That's a major jump in numbers. As well, additional voices from many more countries and from those coming from socially disadvantaged environments were included through the literature reviews. So I think we can say that Education 2030 is working to walk the talk. Ultimately, it's up to all of us to walk the talk as we seek to build understanding of and support for Education 2030. There is much for all of us to do before the next meeting here in Paris. And finally, it's essential that in this process, we take time to concentrate on our own well-being, be that perhaps through meditation, as we did at the start of these 3 days, or through other measures. It's important that we concentrate on being as opposed to running, on becoming, and yet again being. Self-aware, responsible, reflective, empathetic, creative, and forward-thinking. As we all seek to move toward a world focused on individual, societal, and global well-being. Thank you for your attention.